I think I'll have you introduce me everywhere I go. That'd be great. Um, so it is really a privilege to be here. It's always a privilege to share someone's pulpit, even more so when he's a friend. So glad you're here. I, I've always you may or not you may or may not know me, but I've been in this church a few times, and you're actually sitting in the floor that I helped to reconstruct. We came down with a group from I know right? It's fantastic. We came down with a group of guys from our church and rebuilt this floor. We appreciate your church so much because we were able to use the missions house many times to bring groups down here and stay for the weekend. And with great affinity, I remember the worship here. I remember Dave being up here and leading worship. I think probably the thing that I appreciate the most is Dave has a fantastic voice and can play the guitar incredibly well, and the music is loud enough that I can sing, right? And it drowns me out, right? So can I get an amen? All right, so I'm here with my great family, my lovely wife Linda, and my 4 kids, and my kids always tease me about stuff, especially about I'll tell you. So my son Max, who is now 15, when he was about 8, Logan's age, I gave him a haircut, right? So I gave him a haircut that day, and I gave myself a haircut that day. And I said, when I was all done, I said, "Look, buddy, you and I have the same haircut." And he looked at me, kind of like a scrunched up face, and he said, "Do I have an M?" This is what my kids do to me. My daughter said, "Dad, when you turn around and look up, your head says, 'Whoa,'" right? So yeah, so this is my kids. Fantastic. My great encouragers, right? These guys. So today we're here and we're going to be talking about a bunch of things. So we're going to be in Joshua chapter 1. You guys have your Bibles, turn there. It's going to be on the screen. We're going to look through Joshua chapter 1, 3, and 4. So you can put a note in each one of those spots or just turn the page. And before we get into that, I just want to take a moment and pray. All right, let me pray. God, you're good, you're faithful, you're just, and you never fail to be those things. You're so consistent, Lord, and you love me and my inconsistency. Lord, I just appreciate your grace. And I thank you for this morning that we have a chance as a family to sit here and open your word and look at your history and see what you've done for the people, Lord, so that we'll never forget it. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. So as a dad and a husband and a wife, my wife and I really have really tried to spend time with our kids explaining the birds and the bees, right? And so if you don't know what those things are, you may want to explain that to your kids later. But we do that and in an age-appropriate way. So as they get older, we tell them a little bit more and more. So my son turned 10, and we're always looking for opportunities to share this, right? So and try not to make it awkward and easy. So someone at the same time gave us hockey tickets, right? So to go see the Flyers. And so I said, I had 2 tickets. I said, well, this would be a great time for me to go and have a conversation. We can talk in the car, and it'll be nice and easy and pretty comfortable. So we had great tickets. So somebody gave us tickets to the 11th row at the Flyers game, but it was actually the first row over the tunnel where the Zamboni goes in and out. And if you're a hockey fan, you also know that right in that same tunnel is where they sing the national anthem. So they just open the doors, they roll out a carpet, and the gentleman or the lady who sings the national anthem, they walk right onto the ice, they sing the national anthem. And the cameraman stands on the end of the carpet and points back toward the glass right in the corner. Well, our seats were right behind that. And so my son discovered that on the Jumbotron, there was a sign that said Budweiser, right? And right above that was our seat. And I said, look, bud, this is our seat. Like that Budweiser sign is that up there. And so for the entire length of the national anthem, there was this tiny little arm going like this in front of the Budweiser sign on the Jumbotron. So he's just doing this the entire time. It was very funny. So we had a great time with the game, and on the way home, I started to explain stuff. I'm like, bud, this is how things work, and this is how, this goes together, and this all fits, and this is the way that God made it, right? Just at a 10-year-old level, and so we had this conversation. It was a good conversation. I probably droned on for about 20 minutes, trying to lay stuff out for him. And so so we live in Medford, so as we're going up 295 and we're getting off on the exit to go on Route 70 to get back to Medford, I say, well, buddy, do you have any questions? Anything that you have any questions about? And he said, well, yeah, I've got one question. And I'm thinking, wow, I must have nailed it. Like, if he wants to talk about this and he still has questions, like, I must have nailed it. So I said, all right, well, what's your question? And he said, well, why? And I'm kind of leaning in, I'm looking in the rearview mirror, he's sitting in the back seat, and I'm leaning in, wondering, like, what's he going to ask? Am I going to know the answer? How's this work? He said, why is there so much traffic? Like, so he completely missed it, right? He completely missed what we were after, and so today we don't want to miss that. So we're going to start kind of at the back, right? Know where we're going. And so if there's a big idea, if there's something that I really want us to leave with, it's the idea that we should never forget. Just 2 words: never forget. Just never forget. And so never forget what God's done. Never forget what Jesus did. Never forget why he sent his son. Never forget what he did in our lives. Just never forget, because that's dangerous ground when we start to forget things. So I used to be a builder. Before I was a pastor, I was a builder, and so we would get these big sets of architectural drawings, and I would lay them out on a table or on the front of a truck or somewhere, and I'd get all the employees and all the contractors around, and I'd start at the last page. We'd skip all the other stuff, and we'd start at the last page, and I'd lay it out, and I'd say, look, here's what it's going to look like. This is what the house is going to look like from this side, and from this side, and from this side. Because if you know where you're going, then it's just a matter of figuring out how to get there. And so that's the way it is with God, right? We know where we're going, and it's just a matter of living life and getting through there. So for us, as believers, it's about discipleship. It's all about discipleship. And so it's an extension of that. It's not just about discipling one person, but it's about discipling the person who's discipling a person, right? So it's good to disciple someone. It's great to disciple someone who is discipling someone, right? And sometimes, so many times, good is the enemy of great. And so we want to land on the great side. So we want to disciple in such a way that we disciple people that ultimately disciple people. And so to do that, today we're going to talk about 4 different things that we need to move forward. All right? And so the first one is that we lead with courage. So the first thing that we need is courage, and we lead with courage. I don't know if you know this story, but there's a woman named Tanya Head, and Tanya was a survivor of the 9/11 terror that happened in, was that 2001? 2001, is that right? So in 2001, she's in the North Tower. She's looking out the window. She sees the plane fly into her husband's floor in the South Tower. And a little while later, as she's just staring, the next plane flies into her floor. And so it's this terrible story, and the story goes on about how she is rescued by a man in a red handkerchief, and she's pulled to the stairs, and then she collapses going down the stairs, and a fireman finds her on the 20th floor. He finds her, and he carries her out to just barely making it out. And just as they leave the building starts to collapse, right? And so this is her story. People were screaming at the tower as the tower was falling, and run, and then a titanic crash. This is what she remembered. And a torrent of debris rained down, covering the fire truck. She felt the firefighter put his oxygen mask over her face. They were in total darkness, buried alive. They had leapt and dove underneath the fire truck, and then it became encapsulated by the rubble. And then later, when Tanya opened her eyes again, she was lying under a blinding white light surrounded by people with furrowed brows and green surgical masks. Tanya, the doctor said, prodding gently, do you remember what happened to you? She didn't want to remember, didn't want to answer the doctor's questions about whether she knew if she was lying in a hospital, panicked and afraid with oxygen streaming into her lungs and most of her upper body wrapped in white gauze. Closing her eyes, she wished that she could forget about everything she had seen and felt as she fought her way out of that ravaged death trap, climbing over smoldering bodies and people who were dying to save her own life. But she saw and heard it all again as the doctor stood at her bedside, waiting for an answer. The burning North Tower, the falling bodies, the fiery explosion when the people when the plane plowed through the South Tower right in front of her. The carnage in the 78th floor sky lobby. She saw it clearly, as if she were watching it on TV. Dave, she cried out, trying to sit up. Does anyone know where Dave is? Does he know that I'm here? My husband is in the North Tower. I have to go back and make sure he's all right. He'll be looking for me. He'll be worried. What time is it? How long have I been here? Members of the medical team held her down, and she saw them glance at one another. The date is September 16th, the doctor said. Sunday. You've been here since Tuesday. September 16th? What did he mean it was September 16th? What was this doctor saying? It had only been moments ago that she was buried under the fire truck. And so Tanya went on to become a famous survivor. She did news stories. As her story began to get out, and it's dramatic and powerful, as it began to get out, she was invited into television shows and newspapers, and she became a docent and led tours at the World Trade Center Memorial. She went before powerful people on Capitol Hill and spoke about the needs for survivors. She became the president of the Tower Survivors Guild. And it was a powerful story, and it was dramatic. It was courageous. It was amazing. And it was completely fictitious. It was a completely fictitious story. As people started to delve into her story, 5 years later, this is what they found out. On 6 years later, on September 27th, 2007, the headline of the front page of the Times read, "In a 9/11 survival tale, the pieces just don't fit." A photograph of Tanya leading a tribute center tour to the Pataki, Bloomberg, and Giuliani accompanied the 2,200-word account. The story quoted almost everyone in the Survivors Network board and deconstructed Tanya's personal history myth by myth. The family of her husband, the man she claimed to have married who really did die in the North Tower, had never heard of Tanya Head. Merrill Lynch had no record of an employee with her name, nor did Harvard or Stanford have Tanya Head in the student files. Quote, in recent weeks, the New York Times sought to interview Ms. Head about her experiences on 9/11 because she had, in other settings, presented a poignant account of survival and loss, the story said. But she canceled 3 scheduled interviews, citing her privacy and emotional turmoil, and declined to provide details to corroborate her story. Indeed, the Times concluded, no part of her story has been verified. And so this woman and her amazing story that was filled with courage and filled with power and filled with drama was false. And it was a false courage. And so the difference between a real courage and a false courage, the real courage is the courage where people walk into a situation, right? Military, they walk into battle, or police, they walk into a situation, or a godly husband walks into his wife's room and tries to work out what is going on, or daring and courageous parents walk into their children's room to rescue them, right? Courage, you walk in. And over time, courage is proven out when it is tried and it can be substantiated. But Tanya Head's story could not be substantiated. Courage is when you walk in for the sake of others in spite of the fear that you feel. When you walk in for the sake of others in spite of the fear that you feel. And so Ralph Waldo Emerson said it differently. He said, a hero is no braver than an ordinary man, but he is brave 5 minutes longer. Right? Perfect way to put it. And so we look at the courage of what happened in the nation of Israel as they were in the wilderness, right? So the history of them, they had left 40 years earlier, they had left Egypt, right? This daring escape, crossed the Red Sea, headed toward the Promised Land, and Moses ultimately sins and leads his people astray, right? He hits the rock instead of speaking to the rock, and the sins of the people, and they end up wandering around the wilderness for 40 years. Moses dies the very end of the book before. We get to chapter 1 of Joshua, and we find out that Joshua is in this place where God is saying, look, we're ready to lead you across to this place, and here's how we're going to do it. So we're going to pick this up in verse 1 of chapter 1. So after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites to the great sea, toward the going down of the sun, shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I love the fact that in here God tells Joshua 3 times in this passage. He tells him 2 more times later in the chapter, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. You have to be strong. You have to walk into this. You have to be strong in this moment. You have to be courageous. And I love that, because to me that means that God chose someone who is afraid. Right? Because you don't say to someone, stand up straight, if they're standing up straight. Right? You don't say to someone, don't be afraid, if they're not afraid. So Joshua's walking into this knowing that in front of him is this river that he's supposed to cross, and beyond that, there are giants in the land. Right? Remember that song, right? There are giants in the land. And so he's walking into this place where there are just people that he does not know how they can conquer. Even though God takes the time to say, look, wherever it is that you put your feet, you'll have that land. And whomever it is that you walk up against, they will not stand against you. And so you have this God of the universe who's created everything and done everything and led this entire people, millions of people, to this place. And he's saying, you can trust me in this. Wherever it is that you are, I will give you that land. What an amazing statement. It's for many of us, some of us, we may be in that place where we say, God, I don't know why I'm here. You said this promise to me a long time ago, but I'm here in this place and I just don't know. God has promised you what God's promises don't change. He promised it to you, he will deliver it to you. And so that's the first thing. We lead with courage. And we jump over to chapter 3, and we step with faith. We step with faith. And so we're going to look at chapter 3, verse 5. Starting in verse 5, we're going to read for a little bit. It says, Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And so many times in the midst of a passage, we'll just jump over a word. And so it says, consecrate yourselves. And so we look at that and we say, okay, well, consecrate. So I'm going to go consecrate myself, and then I'll be right back. But it means so much more than just a word, right? It's setting yourself apart for holiness. Setting yourself apart for holiness. So God is saying, this is what you need to do, people of Israel. You need to set yourself apart for holiness, because I will do great wonders through you. And I love that for us as believers, for us to be able to work through this process of setting ourselves apart for holiness so that God can do great works among us. I just think it's such a powerful statement. In verse 6, it says, Joshua said to the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on before the people. So they took up the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. Verse 7, the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And as for you, command the priests who bear the Ark of the Covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan. And Joshua said to the people of Israel, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, Here is how you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is passing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, from each tribe a man, and when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap. Verse 14, so when the people set out from their tents to pass over the Jordan with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord before the people, and as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the brink of the water. Now note that the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout this time of the harvest. The waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those flowing down from the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off, and the people passed over opposite Jericho. And there's a lot going on in that passage, right? And so before we get into it, I just want to tell a little story. So when I was, before I did this, I was a builder, right? So I said that. And so there was this time, I told my kids, on just a sidebar, I told my kids one of the most daring things I ever did as a dad, I gave them permission to imitate everything that I do and say, right? I remember my heart was actually pounding when I did this because I realized, oh no, what have I just done? So don't do this. This was before I told you. All right, so I was a builder, and so I was working in Haddonfield, and our niche was large additions and fine old homes. So the finer the work, the more we enjoyed it, and that was kind of our niche of what it was that we did. And so with this giant addition, right? So we were adding 2,500 square feet to this house. It was a huge. It was already a big house, and now it's a huge house. And so with these huge additions comes huge sets of plans. And so I used to have a Suburban, so I was driving through town on my phone, pulling a trailer behind me, right? So on the phone, someone asks me a question, and I said, I don't know, let me check. So I unroll the plans all the way across the front of the truck, the entire way across. And then he made a note, or he said something, I had to take a note, so I pull out pad, tuck the phone on my shoulder, pull out paper, and I'm now driving, can't see the dashboard, can't see the steering wheel, trailer behind me, driving with my knee, can't know if I do this, right? This is me driving down the road through Haddonfield until I hear whoop, whoop, woo, woo, and a police officer pulls me over. And I don't know if you've ever seen Liar, Liar, but he pulls me over and he comes up to the window and he says, do you know why I pulled you over? And if you saw Liar, Liar, he flings open the glove box and he says, unpaid parking tickets, right? Because he can't tell that he can't lie. So fast forward to the end of the story, right? I'm driving away now with a ticket, the dashboard completely clear, a ticket sitting on the seat next to me. And I just appreciate that there are times that God clears the dashboard in our lives. And so as we look at this passage, I want you to think just for a moment of that priest who's the first person, right? So the Ark of the Covenant was carried by 4 priests, right, on their shoulders, and it was carried. And so think about that first priest. You think about faith, right? So if we step with faith, you think about that first guy. The second guy behind him says, oh yeah, I have plenty of faith. Here, you step into the water. I'll come right behind you, right? But think about that first one. So he knows that Joshua has just said to him, the moment you put your foot into the water, right, the flood stage water of the Jordan River, the water's going to stop. So just go ahead, just step in. God already said it. You can do it, right? So when we step with faith, that's what's going to happen. But you think about this priest, like he's just a guy, right? So there's nothing particularly special about him except for the fact that he was born into the Levitical lineage, right? So he's of the tribe of Levi, and so he's been born into caring for the temple and grew up as a priest. So he's married in all likelihood. He's got kids. He's got relationships. He's got friends. He's in a place where, his role, he's got a job, so he's got Levitical duties where he's caring for the temple on a regular, or the tent of meeting on a regular basis. They're moving all the time, right? So he's constantly packing up. He's constantly unpacking. As I start to think about his life more and more, it's a stressful time, right? So he's got the same stresses. Maybe it's the same stress as us, but it's a similarly stressful time. No heat, no air conditioning, no running water, no bathrooms. Like there's other things. Like this is a real guy who's living a real life. And so you think about him, he's got all this stuff going on in his life, and then he steps up to this, and he's in a place where he has no choice but to trust God. And his dashboard has been wiped clear. And it is just him and the river. And as I see it, there's 4 or 5 ways that this guy is going to die. At first, he's carrying the Ark of the Covenant. So if he mishandles the Ark of the Covenant, God will strike him dead. Right? There's scriptural basis for this. So he knows if he mishandles this, he's in trouble. So he's just a dead man. Second, he's wearing robes, right? Priestly robes. So he's wearing this. So he's about to step into a river that's at flood stage, wearing robes. Like it's not going to work out for him. Plus, the Ark of the Covenant is just heavy, and the Ark of the Covenant is wrapped in the hides of sea cows. You guys know what a sea cow is? It's a manatee, right? A manatee. So manatees, I was snorkeling once, and a manatee literally swam in front of me. I could reach out and touch it. Scared me to death. And it just kept going. I mean, the small ones weigh 700 pounds. So imagine an offensive lineman, right, laying over the Ark of the Covenant as you're carrying this into a river at flood stage. And then they've been roaming around the desert for 40 years. Like, the guy can't swim. So he's just a dead man. So if God doesn't show up, the moment he steps his foot in, he's dead. And so I think about the fact that he stepped with faith, right? And believers step in. We walk into what God has called us into. And so he steps in, and everything that God said happened. And I love that it says that the water stopped very far away at Adam. And I just love the fact that it's at Adam. Like, listen, you have to understand, priest, that since Adam, I have been preparing this step for you. And I love that Ephesians 2:10, right? Good works that God has prepared in advance for us to do. And this was a good work that God prepared in advance for this man to do. And so he steps up. They've done studies, right? That's hours upstream. They know where Adam is and where Zarephath is, and they think they know where they crossed the Jordan. And it was hours in advance that water had already stopped. He couldn't see it, right? He steps in, and the water stops up there, and it continues to flow out. And they walk down into this river in this amazing circumstance. And I just love that. I just love how God continues to do those things, and we get to see that. And then the next thing that we see is that we move with action. Right? This is the third thing. We move with action. And in verse, now the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation passed over the Jordan. If you write in your Bibles and you have a pen, just circle dry. It's in there twice. Like don't miss that. I'm a fly fisherman, and so note that I'm not a fly catcherman. I'm a fly fisherman, right? There's a difference. Somehow people catch a lot more fish than I do. But I love to fly fish, and so I have this goal, lifetime goal. I wanted a goal that would take me a lifetime to accomplish. And so I have a goal that I catch a fish fly fishing in every state. It's one of my goals. And so it's a fun goal. It's a great goal to try and accomplish. And so I've got 15 states so far, and it's just fun. And so with that means that I have slid down the riverbank many times. And I have struggled to get up out of the riverbank many times because it's muddy. It's a mess. This is at flood stage. So, I mean, this is like there's just mud everywhere. And so for us as believers, we have to realize that when God dries up the river, he dries up the mud too. We have to remember that. God dries up the mud as well. And so it says twice in the same verse, like we have to notice the repetition, right? Twice in the same verse that they crossed over on dry ground and they walked out of the riverbank on dry ground. And so these priests were there and they got to stand in the middle of this river. And so I had a professor in seminary, I'm sure I'll never forget this. He said, whenever you preach out of the Old Testament, you have to preach in such a way that if you were to say it in the temple, you would get thrown out. Right? And I love that. And so that means that you have to tell them about Jesus. And so Jesus, this is such a great harbinger of the story of Jesus because Jesus walked into the river for us in our lives. And he stopped the water on that side and he stopped the water on this side and he said, go ahead, you can pass in front of me. And you can go into the promised land. You can walk into the promised land because he prepared good works for us to do in advance. And so he's calling each and every one of us into the promised land. That's what he's doing. And I just love that, the faith of Jesus. And then lastly, number 4, we stand with memory. We stand with memory. Have any of you been up Mount Washington? Driven up Mount Washington? Anybody? Oh, one. Okay, good. She'll keep me honest. I was going to make stuff up. All right, so Mount Washington, right, is it's a 6,000-foot peak, part of the Presidential Mountain Range in New Hampshire, and so you can actually drive up this. It's one of the taller mountains on the East Coast, and so you can actually drive up this mountain all the way to the top. So when I drive, my wife is nervous. When my wife drives, we're both nervous. And so we had this opportunity, right? Linda is in the driver's seat. She's driving up this windy, most dangerous road I've ever been on. This is no exaggeration. I'm sitting in the passenger seat. There's a sign. It says, repaving ahead, right? Which is funny because it's just a dirt road. So I don't know what they were doing. They're literally spreading dirt around to make it better. And so we're sitting there. Linda's actually frightened. She's got the parking brake on, right? We're waiting for the traffic to clear. She's got the parking brake on. It's in park, 2 feet on the brake. And I'm sitting there next to her, right? I mean, it seems like we're, like, if it wasn't for the dirt holding us to the earth, we would be sliding backwards. Like, that's how steep it felt. And I'm sitting in the passenger seat, just sitting upright. And as I look out, right, I can't see the road. And if I'm exaggerating this, I can see the valley in 1,000 feet down. If it's an exaggeration, it's 2,000 feet. I mean, it's got to be a half mile to the valley floor, and I can't see the edge of the road right here. So Linda can't see anything, and she's literally afraid she's going to drive off. It was like a counseling session, getting her to, okay, now take the parking brake off. Okay, now put it in drive. Now take your left foot off the brake. Now put your right foot, step on the gas. Like this is how we move forward, right? And so we finally wind our way all the way up to the top of Mount Washington, and we pull in, like we're the second to last car in the parking lot, and at the top there's a big weather station. And so we pull in, and right in front of the van, right, we had a minivan, right in front of the van is a pile of rocks, right, called a cairn. Cairn University, right, so the cairn, it's a pile of rocks. It's a marker on a trail. So people over the years have just picked up rocks and made a marker so you didn't miss it. And I'm sitting there, I'm in the passenger seat. It's what they call a 100-mile day, a 100-mile day, which means that you can see for 100 miles. And literally from where we were, we could see into Canada. We could see mountain peaks in Canada, which was far. 75 miles away, we could see this one Owl Mountain or Owl's Nest Mountain, whatever it was. It was amazing, beautiful. And so they had this one cairn right in the front of the car. And literally 5 feet away was another one. And 10 feet beyond that was another one. And 10 feet beyond that. And these are all these markers for the Appalachian Trail, right? It goes from Georgia to Maine, right? All these markers, and it goes over the tops of all the peaks of the Presidential Mountain Range. And I'm sitting there looking, and I realize that I can see 20, 30 of these markers. And I literally had this thought of, why in the world would someone take the time to put all these piles of rocks? Like, there are rocks everywhere. Why do you need a pile of rocks there? And why so many? Like, that's just a dumb waste of time. Couldn't you be using that time in some other way? I mean, you could see from there, you could see into the valley, you could see up the next range. Like, you could see these markers all over the place. So I didn't give it any other thought. We got out, we walked up the walkway, we went into the weather center. We're watching videos, right? The strongest winds on record were found there, 273 miles an hour. Worst winds on Earth that they've ever tested for. Unbelievable, right? So the weather just rolls in really quickly there. And so we're there. We're talking to hikers. We're having a snack in the cafe, and we get ready to leave. And we walk up and we walk out, and there are doors, right? Just glass doors that had been painted gray on the outside. Weird. It's such beautiful views. Why would they paint the doors gray? And so we get closer, and it doesn't make sense to me. And we get there and realize it's not gray paint, it's fog. It's just fog. And so open up the door, and the fog is so dense, like I couldn't see you guys. And so we struggled to make our way down this walkway in the middle of the densest fog I've ever been in, right? Clouds had rolled in. And we got to where our car should be, right? And we couldn't see it. We got to the car next to it, and we could finally see our car. And it was my turn to drive down the hill. So we get in. I sit in the steering wheel, and I look, and there's one pile of rocks that I can see. Just one. And I just appreciate that story when I read what happens in chapter 4. It says this: when all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, take 12 men from the people, from each tribe of man, and command them, saying, take 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do those stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. And so these stones shall be to the people of Israel a memorial forever. We need the piles of rocks because we get lost. And so if you walked on that trail, if you walked to that one pile of stones, you would be able to see the next pile of stones. And if you got lost, you could return to the last pile of stones before you had to find your way. And God was saying, look, I want you to take 12 stones out of the river, out of the middle of the miracle of God. The place where the only way you can get those stones is if God moves. I want you to take those 12 stones, and I want you to put them on the bank so that you will always remember, so that if you get lost as a nation, as a people, you can return to these places. And when your kids say, why are those rocks there? You'll be able to tell them, this is where the great and mighty God was. And this is what he did. It's a powerful place. And so these memories, we probably all have these memories in our lives, right? I know I do. And so in a minute, we're going to have a chance to kind of share them, right? So there's a small enough group, I think we can probably share some of these stories. So you think about some places, some markers in your life. I'll tell you one of mine. So I made this transition from business to being a pastor. And it was not an easy transition, and there were just things that I really had to work through. How am I doing this? So, it was a good business, and I was leaving that and becoming a pastor, and it was kind of a scary point. And so we were small. My wife and I were small group leaders at our church. We'd been small group leaders for about 5 years, and so we worked with this one gentleman named Bob Chafee, great mentor of mine who's since gone to be with the Lord. And so I called up Bob after there were some circumstances in my life that I won't get into, but I called up Bob and I said, hey, listen, Bob, I'm thinking about making a career change. And so he said, well, sure, we'll have lunch. And so we go and we sit down and we have lunch. And I said, look, I think God's calling me to be a pastor. And so we talked a bit more, and it ended up being a couple-hour lunch. And at the end of the lunch, he said, Eric, I've been praying for 1 year for someone to come and take my place. No one knows that I'm leaving. You're the first person that I'm telling outside of my wife, but I'm leaving. And I've been praying for someone to come and take my place. And I think you're the guy. And so for me, when I get lost, right, because I'm no different than anyone else, I'm just a man. When I get lost, that's one of the stories that I return to. And I say, God, I can't find my way. And I work my way back to the last place that I knew God was. And so for you, for us, as we look back over life, if we do this long enough, we start to see that we're standing on a mountaintop and we can see into that valley and all the markers and up to the other mountaintop and see that marker. And we can see down into that valley and these markers. And we start to realize that we're not lost. We're on this trail. And I just want to encourage you that the markers that are being made right now in your life, you probably don't recognize. Right? You probably don't know that they're there. But these are the markers you will need for the time in the future when you get lost. Right? So just think about that as you work through stuff. Like, there are just hard things in life that happen. And someone around you is picking up rocks and they're putting them in a pile for you. Right? That's what the family of God does. We put them in piles for people so that you won't forget this moment. You'll be able to return to this place and recognize this is where God was. And so I just want to, if you're comfortable, give you a moment to just kind of share, like, this story that you have that says, yeah, this is some place that I saw God work in my life. So go ahead. So I just appreciate you taking the time to share the stories. They're courageous and they build a family, right? Stories build a family, and it's good. It's good to share stories. It's good to look back over life and realize where God has worked. And if you want to do more of this, that's a great journaling exercise or great family reflection. How many times can we remember where God has worked in our family or things like that? It's just a great exercise as a couple. Maybe you look for something to do on date night. Like, let's just talk about what God has done in our lives, things like that. And so I want to just think for a moment about those priests. Right? They're standing in the middle of the river. They're in the midst of the miracle of God. Like, that's an amazing and blessed place to be. The waters stop. They're standing on dry ground. And I just think about them. They've watched millions of people come across down the riverbank, walk in front of them, walk up the riverbank, and now it's just them. And they know that they can't stay there. We're not called to stay in the middle of God's miracles, right? They last a time. And so for these priests, they were standing there knowing that their time in the middle of God's miracle had to end. And I just wonder what it was like for them as they just walked up the riverbank, past the pile of rocks that the 12 men had already put there, and into the land that God had already promised them. I just think that's a picture of us as believers. Like, it's so easy for us to read this story and go, what are you worried about? It's the promised land. God already promised it to you, right? Because we see the beginning and the end of their story, right? But it's the same thing for us. We see the beginning and the end of our story, and if you turn to the last page of your Bible, you realize that that's the end of the story. And the same God that built the markers in our past is building the markers all along so that we don't get lost. And we get to the end and we realize that God is there and victorious and Jesus is risen and he's seated on a throne waiting to receive us. And it's a powerful picture. In the end, it's already been paid for. It's already been accomplished. We have to build the trail as we go to get there. All right, let me pray. God, you're powerful. You're good. Thank you for today, for the stories, Lord. They're just great and good stories. Markers in our lives that you've been so faithful to make. people in our lives have been so faithful to pick up stones for us. Lord, I know that you're making markers in our lives right now that we can't appreciate. Right now, they feel like people are throwing stones at us rather than piling rocks, I'm sure. But at some point, we'll turn around and look back and see that you did good with those things. It was good to be done, and you did it. And so, God, I just thank you for who you are. I thank you for this body of believers, Lord. I thank you for your promises. I thank you for the hope. And I thank you that you never fail to be good. Because the moment you fail to be good, you fail to be God. So we thank you for who you are, God, and we praise your name together.